it's great. Yeah, going back to the BBC project, just a tremendous public response. I've had so many lovely messages and emails from people, and some lovely handwritten letters as well, which just felt really, really nice to read. People have taken the time. So I'm making my way through it all, and I'm writing a personal response back to every single person. But I really wanted to, because people gave their time. People really gave their time to do this.
And what were you hoping to get? I mean, what was the, what was the kind of dream in your mind? We'd love to get, X number of responses.
Well, I mean, as I said, we'd been hoping for the possibility of tens of thousands, but we just never knew we'd get to that level. So it's just tremendous. We knew it was going to be a large scale questionnaire study, because that's the nature of it. This is obviously put out to a very large audience via the BBC radio and other kind of publicity and promotions that the BBC did. And it's all in service of actually raising the profile of kindness in our lives. And I guess that's what Kinder Leads is doing as well. It's just saying that actually this is something that we need to recognize and celebrate. So that's really where this is all coming from. And what we wanted to do was to say, actually, this deserves attention. We need to understand it's not just some sort of a soft, fluffy thing that's all just very nice and it's a bit of luxury if you've got time for it, but actually saying, this is pretty fundamental stuff. This is about how our communities work. This is how human beings work.
I'm sorry, I don't think I've asked you, how did Radio 4 get involved? I mean, how did this all come about in terms of the study itself?
Okay, so this came about through a particular individual who is the wonderful Gloria Hammond. So Gloria Hammond is the presenter of All in the Mind on BBC Radio 4. And she is a University of Sussex graduate. And when I became head of school, so the head of the School of Psychology just 2 years ago, one of the very first things I did was to reach out to Gloria and say, I really love your show. I love what, and to be honest, Gloria, I'd met her before as well. So we'd spoken about this. I said, I really love what you're doing. The public engagement in research is so important for psychology. There's so much connection with real world experience of, the whole population. It would be great to work with you around the sort of public engagement with research taking place at Sussex. And I was delighted to achieve this. She was appointed to be a visiting professor, the first ever visiting professor for the public understanding of psychology. So that's really exciting. So that happened 2 years ago. We've been talking on numerous occasions, and she said she thought that this was something that the BBC more broadly would be really interested in. So we did a little bit of a pitch, if you like. I spoke to the commissioning editors at the BBC. They were really enthusiastic. I have to say, Gloria, it's kind of an interesting one, and I'm sure you've encountered this in the work with Kinder Leads as well. There is a little bit of skepticism at first when people say, okay, kindness, so what is there to say about it? It's nice to be kind, but let's live in the real world as well. And I'm making the point that actually living in the real world is all about understanding kindness, understanding the impact on people and communities, understanding what difference it makes to our lives, to our mental health, our well-being, what difference it makes to how we actually do things as a community, as a workplace, as a school, as a community, in a home, all of those kinds of things. And we just don't know enough about that. I mean, I might be biased, right? I'm an academic researcher, but all of my work has been with schools and community youth settings. That's the background that I have. And I just felt like there is a story to be told here. There's so much that we don't know. We need to do something on this. And so that was essentially the pitch. And they went with it. And look at the response. It's been just tremendous.
Do you think the response would have been different 2 years ago? Pre-pandemic, because it's an interesting one, everything that's happened to everybody in the last 18 months.
Yeah, that was a great question, Gloria. I've thought about that a lot. I mean, it's always difficult with these counterfactual, right? This isn't a controlled situation. I don't know is the answer, but I do think kindness has become more prominent in people's minds in the course of the pandemic. And I I guess it's something to do with us questioning what our values are, like what really counts for us, what really matters. So much has been disrupted of our everyday experience. So I think that's in our heads now, like really interrogating ourselves, really doing a little bit of collective introspection and thinking, what does really matter for us in the world? And I think we're still in that place. And I think perhaps actually we're in a bit of a challenging place now because we're kind of moving in quotes back to something more normal. I don't think it's in any way really back to normal, whatever that means. But I think that leads to a question about actually, is all of this stuff that we've been talking about during the pandemic just something that we kind of put aside now because we're now moving on? I really hope not, because I think if kindness got attention, I think it did, and it seems to be getting that attention during the pandemic, I hope that's telling us something about our direction of travel as a society, and I so hope that we hold on to that.
Are there many studies already in this kind of area, either in the UK or globally? Because I kind of have heard of bits, but I'm not really sure, you know, what the body of work is behind this.
It is something that is being researched, and it's also something that's being researched increasingly. So if you were to go back to the 1980s, and I mean, obviously I know the psychology field better than other disciplines, but if you go to psychology research databases from the 1980s and look up articles which refer to kindness in their title or abstract, that's sort of the article summary. I remember, because I actually did this, in the 1980s, there were literally 35 individual papers which did that, okay? In the last 10 years, in the decade starting 2010, there have been well over 1,000. So that's the scale of the change, right? It's increased dramatically. Now, I think it still pales into insignificance in terms of the volume of work in comparison with the work on, if you like, the more negative side of human psychology, whether that's mental health difficulties or problems in our lives, psychological challenges. And I understand where that's coming from, right? So when people look at serious difficulties, mental health problems, bullying, when you look at those things, you obviously need to give that attention and you want to address it. I think where we're heading, though, is to a new place where we're reconfiguring all of those different problems in terms of not just what's the bad stuff that's happening, but where is the good stuff? Where are the positive things? And kindness is one of those. And it could be, and this is the kind of thing that we're trying to get at in our research, and I think we've only just scratching the surface, it could be that kindness is actually one of the core ingredients for mental health, for tackling mental health problems. And how do we go about that? You know, that's a positive psychology intervention. We still need to know more about how that works. So it's not like treating the bad is actually fostering the good.
I think that's interesting, because I think one of the things that we certainly feel about the festival, and I'm very passionate about, is it's like wherever you put your energy is what grows. So if you put your energy into kindness, compassion, you know, and well-being, which is our kind of tagline, then that's what's going to grow. And that's not just, you know, we're not just saying that. I mean, that's my absolute experience in terms of my own personal life, is the more I've put into this, guess what? I'm surrounded now by kind people. Kind people just come into my life without me having to try anything. And this is because I'm spending time on myself and doing, you know, work in terms of, you know, healing myself and being kinder to myself, because that's a fundamental part of all this. And people always think about kindness is just about other people, and it is part of that, but you actually have to start with yourself. If you're saying horrible things to yourself when you see yourself in the mirror, you know, what does that do? That doesn't put you in a great space, does it? But you know more about that than I do.
Well, no, I think those things that you said on a very intuitive basis actually have really good research support and growing research support as well. That self-compassion, self-kindness, I think is really important. And that's not simply a kind of a big yourself up for a kind of an ego boost. it's actually a fundamental part of self-care, which is important for being able to manage our relationships in the world. Because let's face it, the world does have an awful lot of challenges to grapple with. I mean, our screens are filled with sad news, bad news stories 24/7. Now, in the face of that, how we manage our relationships in our local communities, in our homes, in our schools, in our workplaces, in our neighborhoods, more generally, all of those things, I think hinge upon you being in a well state, a healthy state, and being able to connect with others in a healthy way as well. To my mind, giving that attention may be really important now more than ever. And the pandemic, I think, has in some ways physically separated us, right? I mean, literally with the social distancing, it's physically separated us, but there's an opportunity here to say, actually, can this be a way to bring us together as well?
So taking on that point then, Robin, what do you do for yourself, and how are you kind, to yourself, and what sort of self-care practices do you use?
Well, you know what, I think actually being able to take multiple perspectives is a hugely important thing for me as well. And to be able to say, sometimes when you're really caught up in something which is very stressful or very difficult, being able to just take another perspective on it, take a wider perspective on the issues, and to recognize that you're doing the best you can under the circumstances. I think those sorts of things, like how we appraise the situations mentally, is really important. And of course, that's precisely what we have to do when we're managing our relationships with other people as well, right? It's all about fundamentally being empathic and compassionate towards other people as well as to yourself. And that means being able to walk in other people's shoes, understand the world from different perspectives, understand that how I'm feeling at this very moment is not going to be the same as how other people are seeing things. And having that multiplicity of perspectives, I think, is a really, really crucial factor. Sometimes we get so locked into a particular way of thinking, even a particular way of feeling, that it becomes impossible to step out of that and to see the world from that different perspective. But I think that's one of the most important things that we can learn. And I think I said to you at the beginning that my background is more working with children and young people in schools and youth settings. And I think that's something that children and young people really have to learn. It's not there by magic. They have to learn those skills to be able to take perspectives and to understand the world from different eyes, if you like.
So tell us a bit then about your background, because I was kind of curious how you made that leap. We didn't get to speak about that much last time because I wanted to sort of save it for this conversation. So, you went from studying child psychology and then suddenly you're an expert in, or a leading researcher in kindness. How did that happen?
Yeah, I keep asking myself that question as well. How did that happen? Okay, so that's right, Gloria. I'm a developmental psychologist. So child development is what I've been doing for my whole career, and still is predominantly the area of research specialism that I'm involved in. So I do a lot of work around education and clinical psychology with children and young people. And I had been focusing a lot on mental health and well-being, particularly in school settings. And one of the key things that comes through there is that, of course, mental health and well-being aren't just things that sort of sit inside a child's head as if it's like a property residing in their brain. Actually, children are not existing in a vacuum. They don't exist in a silo. They exist within a network, a complex network of social relationships. And if we want to understand mental health and well-being for a child, we have to look outside the child as well. It's not just like, who's got a problem, let's pluck them out of their classroom and get a therapist to see them and then they'll be fixed, and then we put them back in the classroom. Actually, we need to understand, what is that classroom like? What's the family context like? What's the community? What's the cultural context like, right? So that idea of looking at mental health and well-being in terms of relationships immediately takes you into, okay, well, relationships are, well, they're simple on one level, but on another level, they bring about challenges, right? And let's think about it from the very beginning, children in daycare, right? The very beginning of managing to form and establish friendships with other kids, And then what happens when things go wrong? You fall out with other kids, you have conflicts, you try to resolve those conflicts, forgiveness, listening to each other, communicating. These are all social and emotional competencies that children and young people develop to a greater or lesser extent throughout their lives. And it doesn't stop when you're like 5 years old. It doesn't stop at 11 or 16. It goes on for the rest of your life. We're all still developing those social and emotional competencies. But one of the big things that comes through when you look at social and emotional development of children and young people is the investment in positive pro-social connections with other people. Children who respond pro-socially to other kids reap the benefits of that, right? They have better relationships, they have greater well-being. Doesn't mean that they don't encounter conflicts, doesn't mean that they don't have problems, but they are learning about the fundamentals, the building blocks, if you like, of being a human being in a social world with other kids. Now, in the course of that work, there's been a lot of attention to what schools can do to promote those social and emotional skills. And there's some really wonderful developments over the last 30 years. Really, there's been a huge amount of progress where people have come up with really great curriculum resources to help children develop those skills, group work activities, teamwork, collaboration, coping strategies, managing your behavior, all of those kinds of things. But, sorry, this is a really long story, Gloria, but the context of this and the reason why kindness came in was because the more I did on this, the more I realized this can never just be a case of a brilliant teacher or learning support assistant standing up and supporting kids with developing the skills just as a kind of a standard lesson. There are some great curriculum resources, but fundamentally, what I began to realize was, and this is like not rocket science, you all know this, right? You all know this from your own experience. You walk into a school and you have that question, what is this place like? For everybody in it, not just the children, for the staff, for the parents, for the visitors. What is this place like? What's this environment like? And where did that take me? Well, it took me to kindness. So I began to ask, what is the climate, the culture of this place like? Is it a culture which promotes well-being, which is compassionate, which shows kindness? And that's more than just what happens in a PSHE class, the personal, social, and health education. It's more than what happens in there. You could have a brilliant PSHE class, a brilliant teacher who does great work on social skills. But I then began to ask the question, what happens when they come out of that PSHE class, that brilliant class, and they step into the canteen to have their lunch? What happens when they go to recess and they're playing with their friends? What happens after school when they're on the bus on the way home? And it's that much more collective picture of what is it like as an environment. And the more I started to talk about this with other people, it kind of resonated with them. And they said, actually, that's a really helpful lens to look at my own field of research, which could be, I don't know, the business world or healthcare or social work, whatever it might be. People began to say, actually, this is really, really useful. And we need to think about kindness in our lives in this way. And so that's where it came from. And I began to ask, actually, this is not something that we've really grappled with. Kindness is we just kind of assume it's there. We assume it's quite a nice thing, but we easily fall into that trap of thinking, well, I mean, even schools, they fall into the trap of thinking, well, it's a very nice thing to be kind, but, you know, at the end of the day, we've got to get through our syllabus and we've got our kids to, you know, we need to get them to pass their exams and do well. That's what really counts. That's the bread and butter of being a school. And it's that siloing that I want to challenge, because I don't think kindness is over here and the sort of academic achievement and performance is over there. I think the two of them absolutely come together.
Yeah, what if we flipped it around? And this was something that came up last night in the launch event with Dr. Tupten Jimpa was talking about compassion, you know, as well. And compassion and kindness, they are a bit different, but there's a lot of overlap. And it's like, well, what if we change the structures? You know, what would that do? I mean, what, you know, and getting everybody to think about how we can do that. But schools, you're absolutely right. I mean, I've walked into different schools and you get a completely different vibe from being there, you know, and you're like, yeah, I'm not sure about this. It feels a bit uncomfortable. You know, how are the children who are much more sensitive to everything, you know, how are they feeling in this space?
Exactly. And it's the little this is the other thing I always say about kindness, that I always say the little things are the big things, because a lot of times people think about kindness and they immediately think, okay, this is like all about grand gestures, like really huge acts of kindness. And they are wonderful, don't get me wrong, right? There's some really incredible humanitarian responses, real generosity, and you think, wow, that is absolutely amazing. And it makes you, you know, it moves you, you feel the impact of it. But I also don't want to knock the small stuff and say, well, they don't count, because I think actually the small stuff counts a lot. It makes a difference to what the place feels like. And I'll tell you one story that really made me think about it. This is a long time ago, and I haven't really been thinking about the staff experience very much at all at that time in the school work that I was doing on mental health. And that was it was like a real sort of eye-opener moment. It was the end of a project. We'd done kind of the standard stuff that I'd been doing at that time. So social emotional learning, curriculum resources to support young people's development. And we'd finished this project. We'd had some really great, it seemed like great results. Students really seemed to engage with it. This was all kind of based in PSHE classes, and they seemed to really buy into it all, and they loved it. And I asked this one kid who was in a primary school, so he was only probably 9 or 10 years old, something like that. I was just chatting with the kids afterwards. We'd done a session where they'd filled out some questionnaires and things. I was chatting with the kids afterwards, and I said to one of the boys, so what's the biggest thing you've noticed now after having done this big project, right? What's the biggest thing you've noticed? And the interesting thing was that he said, oh, biggest thing I've noticed is that the teachers smile at each other more. And I thought that was so interesting, because I said smile at each other. I was expecting that it would be about smiling at the kids or something like that. But this boy, obviously a very observant boy, had noticed that the teachers were smiling at each other more. I thought that wasn't originally the aim of the project, but that sounds pretty powerful actually. And that got me that got me thinking about, hang on, there's a lot more going on here than just how are the kids behaving. There's something about how are the whole community adapting to this new framework of lessons around kindness, and lessons around social and emotional competencies. And I often think back to that. I think actually this gives us a really, really important insight into the way in which all the pieces of the jigsaw kind of fit together. It's not just about how the children are behaving. It's not just about the children's friendships. It's about everybody in the school community and outside the school gates as well. Obviously, think about families, think about neighborhoods.
Yeah, I think that's really, really very observant of that child. And I'm always amazed at sort of, the wisdom that kids have and what they pick up on. There's what's said and then what they see, and that's so, so important. One thing I wanted to ask you, because I'm kind of interested in the side of, the kind of perhaps negative side when people are under stress, and where the kindness seems to just can disappear. So when I saw that the kindness test had come out, somebody, I think my husband actually was the one who said, oh, have you seen this? And I said, no. So I was looking at the article, and underneath the article is one of the major newspapers. Underneath the article were all these comments, and the comments were about actually how people had seen a lot of unkindness, particularly in the retail sector. It seemed to be like, either workers in the retail sector had sort of felt unkind behavior towards them, or other people had observed that. And then I was, so I thought about that, and I was a bit, I'm disappointed that that's what people have seen, because I saw so much kindness during this last period. But clearly there was a thing going on. And then more recently, we had this kind of fuel crisis that wasn't a fuel crisis. And I brought this up last night because I'm intrigued as to how people behave differently when under stress. And I know myself, when I'm under stress, you're kind of, your focus kind of narrows. And I just wonder, what can we do? Is there anything we can do to help or to be more aware ourselves that when we're under stress, we tend to behave differently and often unkindly?
It's a really, really interesting set of issues that you're raising there, Gloria. I'll start off by saying actually trying to describe what is actually happening is one of the aims of the kindness test, the project with the BBC, because that's one of the great benefits of having a large scale survey response, right? That we get data from a very, very large number of people about their experiences. And we have got data from not just all over the UK, but all over the world as well. We've had a great international response too. And we want to actually understand, where do people experience kindness and where don't people experience kindness? Where are the places where they're not experiencing kindness? And is that different for different people, or is it the same for everyone? Those kinds of things. So we want to look at that variation and make sense of it. The point about stress, I think, is a really important one. So just as much as there can be the really lovely virtuous cycle that you were talking about before, where you are interested in kindness, you highlight it, you recognize it, and lo and behold, you suddenly see more and more and more of it, right? That's the virtuous cycle. But I think just as much as you've got that virtuous cycle, you can also get the flip side of it, which is a vicious cycle. You can get a pattern whereby people see more and more negativity in the world. As they begin to feel more negative and more stressed about that, they end up actually absorbing even more negativity. So you get that sort of a negative spiral as well. And the question that's always in my head is that inevitable, or can you break into those cycles, right? Can you actually challenge that vicious cycle? And I think you can. And I think it's something to do with our perceptions of social norms. And my feeling is that there's a really, really important job that, I don't know, anyone who has, I don't know who to point to really. Maybe I should be pointing to myself. Maybe it's all of us. But anybody who has kind of some degree of influence, whether it's the media, celebrities, politicians, I don't know. I think there's a responsibility there in terms of how you set the perceptions of a community or a country around what's happening. Because I think part of the vicious cycle is the perception that everybody is acting unkindly and thinking only of themselves in a very individualistic way. The fascinating thing, right, and I think this is a really important point to emphasize, Gloria, the fascinating thing is that when people are in real catastrophes, real disasters, like major kind of natural disasters or human made disasters, what you actually find is a tremendous amount of kindness. It's not exactly what you were just saying, where people just withdraw into themselves and they only think of themselves and they act individually. What you see in huge natural disasters is people helping each other, people collaborating. They're not just individually fighting for survival and other people be damned, I'm just out here for myself. That's not what the evidence shows. People actually collaborate. We're very, very social creatures. And when it comes down to these, absolutely terrifying situations, of course, there's some individualistic sort of survival stuff that you do, but by and large, people reach out to each other. We're each other's sources of support, and that happens in a very natural, intuitive way. And one of the things I really worry about is that we don't highlight that enough. When there's times of stress, especially when there's times of stress, quite often the message going out there is, well, people are just going to do their own thing and they're only going to be out for themselves. And I don't think it's true. But the problem is it becomes true because of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the more people see in the media, the more people hear politicians saying it, the more people hear celebrities saying it, the more people are surrounded by the image of individualistic, selfish, only thinking of yourself type of mentality, the harder it gets. The more people then start thinking, oh, well, that's the way I should behave as well. And it's a very, very weird process. So to my mind, there can be very often a negative spiral like that. And the way to break it is to call attention to the kindness, to call attention to the fact that actually human beings are built to cooperate.
Wonderful. Thank you. I like that. And I think I want to, you know, because I'm with you on that. You know, if we can just kind of turn the perspective and show all the other good stuff, because that's the majority. And that's what people forget. That's the actual majority of people don't go and do that, but you have some people who do. Yeah. And I try and be compassionate, you know, thinking, okay, what's going on for that person? They're obviously in mega fear, you know, something is triggered here that is creating this kind of really, you know, weird behavior in a way, and trying to be compassionate with that person. But it's just interesting, you know, I just find these things, you know, the more, as you say, the more you get into this, the more you kind of intrigued to understand, you know, I mean, I've always been interested in humans anyway, but understand why we do what we do, and can we shift it? Can we as a group, you know, shift what others are telling us? Because that's the other thing, is why are they saying this, you know? Why is the media focusing on that? Why is it always about the kind of the more negative stuff, rather than trying to bring in more of the positive stuff that goes on every day? So is that not a news story, the fact that all this good stuff goes on every day?
I mean, there are organizations trying to do that, right? Where they're trying to make more of a sort of a positive news type of an approach, and to kind of, you know, reverse that general trend for focusing on the negatives, because the negatives just are, you know, there's plenty to focus on, and it seems to be more eye-catching in some ways, and then the positive stuff gets demoted, if you like, to a sort of, maybe you get a human interest story at the end of the news, something like that, right? And I think we have to be realistic about what is going to be catching people's attention, what's going to make people think. And maybe there is something about playing on people's fears, right? Playing on people's sense of stress. Maybe that's where that comes from. And maybe the way that people get attention is by playing on those fears. But I think there are different stories to be told as well. And that's why I think, you know, the public, I mean, this is going to sound really cheesy, right? But the public interest and engagement, interest in and engagement with the BBC project on kindness, and indeed everything that you guys are all doing now with Kinder Leads, it gives me hope. It really does. It makes me feel like actually this isn't a situation where all we're interested in is the kind of latest crisis. It's about human beings in those crises and how we connect with each other and how we work together in those situations. That's what I feel like we're doing here. And I think that's a really important step, because most of the time, kindness isn't very noisy, is it? Doesn't really shout out at you, doesn't get the attention. Most of the time, it's pretty quiet. It's not going to be like big sort of fireworks around it. And I think that's one of the challenges. Like, you know, I often think with social media and everything, like our attention span seems so limited. We're scrolling through things, literally looking at something for half a second before moving on. And there's obviously something about, you know, what speaks to us, what connects with us. And if we can find that actually kindness speaks to us, which is, I think, what the project with the BBC and that great public response has shown me, and I think what we're getting with something like Kinder Leads, I think that does give us all hope.
So how many have you got on your team working on this? How many people are going to be, you know, crunching numbers, and when are the results coming out?
So the project was put together with, I had 4 fantastic early career researchers, PhD students and postdocs who worked with me on actually putting it all together. But I had input from probably about maybe 9 or 10 other researchers, and actually in different parts of the world as well, who kind of contributed. Some people here at Sussex, and then other people elsewhere. And it's a real team effort. We're going to be crunching the numbers and actually reading the stories, because there was some, I mean, you can't do too much kind of qualitative in-depth, because I do quite a lot of that in my own research, but you can't do too much qualitative work when you've got tens of thousands of responses, because you just can't read it all and process all of the information. But we did do some small snippets. I don't know if you remember, Gloria, there were a couple of boxes where we said, describe the last act of kindness you received or performed. And they were like limited to 100 characters or 150 characters, something like that. And those short snippets are just so moving. Gloria, being able to actually look at those and just say, I mean, it's like 50,000 acts of kindness just there. I mean, it's amazing, actually, the data set. But anyway, we are going to be doing a lot of crunching the numbers as well. That is going to be happening over the coming weeks and months. And I think the plan is that they're going to feed into programs on the BBC, which will be aired, I think, probably March next year, February or March next year, roughly speaking, but it's not finalized yet. So that's where the results will be shared. And then, of course, you know, the academic wheels turn much more slowly, right? So writing things up in terms of academic scholarly journals and things like that takes more time. But to be honest, with a big data set like this, I feel like we could be looking at it for a very long time.
That's brilliant. Well, I look forward to all the stuff coming out, because what it does is it keeps the conversation going, it keeps it alive. And I know that you're involved in Kind Fest, which will happen next month. So that's
November
on the 13th.
That's right, yeah.
Of November, which is World Kindness Day. And we're very keen to, you know, support that again, because it keeps the conversation going. It keeps people thinking about kindness. So that's
Definitely.
really great that it'll take us through to, you know, through to March, that will keep the conversation going.
Absolutely. It would be great actually to learn a little bit more about even what comes out of this week of wonderful activity in Kinder Leaves, and maybe showcase some of that as well. So we should definitely talk about that.
Definitely, I'd love that. Just maybe one final question, and then if you're okay, we have a few minutes to maybe ask, you know, see if anybody else wants to ask a question, because obviously I got you all to myself. I get all the time.
I know, absolutely. And, you know, I've been doing so many with classes, right? Because we've had this weird hybrid existence for the past nearly 2 years, it feels like, with teaching online as well. Yeah, the opportunity to actually hear from you, whether this resonates with you and what you think the next steps are. You know, I'm really thinking what next in terms of, you know, it feels like we've scratched the surface just about. Where do we go next with it? I'd really value your thoughts on it. So yeah, please do share.
Yeah. So
you had a final question.
Yeah, it was actually that, is like, how do you see this work developing? Where do you see it going? And then if anybody wants to put a question in the chat room, please do, and I'll monitor that while Robin is speaking.
So I think one of the big things is going to be how we use the insights from this work to inform the development of actual, I don't want to say initiative because that makes it sound slightly gimmicky, but maybe it is going to be an initiative, I don't know. But how does it inform practice, I guess? So what are we going to do differently in my area, in our schools? What are we going to do differently in our education system? But also, what are we going to do differently in our, I don't know, in our business workplace? What are we going to do differently in our social work practice and so on? And one of the big challenges that you come up against is the constraints of the real world, right? How often have you heard people saying, well, that's very nice, but we are where we are, right? The constraints of the real world, reality bites, right? And my thinking is that we have got to get to a place where we don't just kind of throw our hands up in the air and say, oh, well, what are you going to do? You know, we're living in the real world, so can't do all this stuff. It just is a luxury. I think it's got to be different than that. And so what I'd like to do is to try and collate from across lots of different sectors. Like I said, education, mental, even politics or media, right? I would like to get the evidence from all of those different places, the little grass, the little shoots of the plants coming out that give us hope around, actually, no, there are things we can do, even with the constraints of the system. Even if we're in a hyper-competitive environment, there's still room for kindness. And I don't think we've done enough to gather that information. So that's what I'd like to do next. But I'd be very, very grateful for your thoughts and input as well.
I mean, I think what's you know, interesting, because I've always, you know, intuitively, I'm a very intuitive person. You know, for me, it's like, well, I don't need a kind of study to show me that kindness is important. You know, I don't, but I recognize that people do. So your work is very important because it'll show them and say, look, the numbers are here. You know, if you can see that most people want this.
Yeah.
but they don't know how to change their schools. They don't know how to change their businesses. They don't know how to, you know, fundamentally change what's going on. They can do their bit, and it is very important that everybody does their bit, but we also need to change the institution and structures around it in order for it to be the thing. And you know, not, as you say, not something over here, but something fundamentally part of everything that we do.
Absolutely.
I do have a couple of questions in the chat box. Anyway, so what I was going to say is that, you know, between all of us working together, and that's what I see. So the project in Leeds is a 5-year vision of this, and we're working, you know, the council, Leeds City Council, we have some good relationships with them, you know, in terms of there are some people in the council who are doing good work, who are trying to change things. They've got a lot to do, and they don't, certainly our city is not perfect. Nobody would say, you know, there are a lot of issues in Leeds, and we're all aware of them. But if you have some key people saying, actually, this is important and we do want to change this, then things can start to change. You know, I want in Leeds more schools to be part of what we're doing. And we for whatever reason, we haven't been able to reach a lot of schools. We've reached a few who really get it and are on board with it. And but they're almost already kind places. Like these are the ones you walk in and you're like, oh, they understand this. The other one.
That is so true. And I don't know what other people think about this, but my feeling is that there is a real risk here that the kind get kinder. And the ones that are in a more kind of stressed or challenged situation, they don't know how to get started, or they don't feel, is that again, the constraints of reality. They feel, well, that's all very nice, but we're in a very different position. We are in a school where we're under pressure to get our standards up. And we just need to focus on that. And yes, kindness would be lovely, but we first of all got to sort out our exam results. And that then begins a negative spiral, actually. And that's really hard.
We don't have time. We don't have time for kindness.
We don't have time for kindness, exactly. Oh, Brian is good.
There's a question here. So I love the idea of being noisy about kindness. This is from Caroline, one of our volunteers. So she said, is it human nature not to celebrate the kind things we do you think?
It's a really good question. I don't know, Caroline, because I think, like I said, I think there's a lot of evidence that actually we are built to cooperate, right? There's an evolutionary basis for that. Yes, compete as well. Sometimes we have to compete for scarce resources or whatever it might be. But one of the big things about human culture is that it is inherently social. We connect with other people. But why is it that we don't celebrate it? And it seems like celebrating it is a different matter. It does feel, doesn't it, Caroline, that we kind of celebrate when we are individually successful. Maybe we're less likely to celebrate the collective successes. I don't know. I wouldn't like to say that it's human nature. I would say that might be a social norm as well, about what is it that we're encouraged to speak about. And I think something like Kind of Leads is saying, you know what, this is something that is worthy of celebration. So I think it's about changing the social norms there.
Angela, who's our co-founder, really. Angela, I wonder if you would like to unmute yourself and ask the question personally, or do you want me to ask? Because I think it's important for Angela to be seen. Angela's the key person behind the Leeds Festival of Kindness. It was her conversation with Andy Bradley who started this whole thing, and people don't realize that. So I have to unmute her, I think. This is the problem when you're doing oh no, she's unmuted. Oh, no, Angela, do you want to go?
Yeah, thank you, Gloria. Yeah, thank you. Just an amazing session, really.
Oh, thank you, Angela.
Noticing that really inspired. Yeah, I was just kind of along the way, I'm frequently told that kind of kindness, the words we use around kindness, the word kindness itself perhaps, and the language we use around kindness, it's perceived as, oh, that's soft and fluffy and it all feels too nicey, you know, that type of a thing. And actually, for me, it's quite the opposite. Kindness actually takes quite a huge amount of courage, quite a huge amount of commitment, practice, that type of thing. Even sometimes, you know, for the smallest things, you know, there are people in our world that don't experience kindness very often. And it becomes even, you know, more difficult for them to be able to share kindness with they've not experienced it themselves, etc. So there's something for me about, is there some way we can actually help people understand that kindness is actually a necessity and not a luxury and not soft and fluffy?
Yeah. Well, I just agree with it. I agree with everything you said, Angela. It's a weird thing, right? Because it's simple on one level, because we all know what it's like when someone's being kind to us. We all know what it's like when someone's being unkind to us. We know it. So it's very intuitive. And I think we're really, really good at picking up authenticity and kindness. We know when someone's genuinely being kind, as opposed to just doing it for some ulterior motive. I think human beings are really good at picking that up. But it's also really complex and really tough. And if you were to start to think, I mean, just ask anybody who's responsible for an environment anywhere, like in a workplace, or you know, let's say you're a leader of a public service, or you're a politician, imagine, right? And you're to say, okay, what we want is, we all like kindness, so can you help us to create a kind world, you know, create a kind workplace? I think you're going to get a lot of head scratching. It's really tough to do that, because it's not a simple thing. And that should be the moment when you say, hang on a second, this can't just be a soft and fluffy nice thing. Because, you know, if you're leading an organization, you can't just instruct people to be nice and suddenly you've got a kind environment. You know that what's kind for one person might not be kind for other people. You know that being kind in the short term might actually be, in the longer term, for the wider population, be really harmful. So there's a lot of complexity. And I think that you could reposition this as saying, actually, kindness is really fundamental, it's really important, but it's also really tough. It's also something that really needs resilience, it really needs time, it needs seriousness, as well as all of the joy to get it right. And that's something that one person can't do on their own. It's something that we have to do together. So I think regarding it as a, you know, showing the complexities of it, showing why it's nuanced, and saying that we need to work through this together. I think those are the steps that I think are important. So we need to ask the questions. At least we're then asking the question. We might not get to the answer straight away, but as soon as you start asking the questions, it takes you on a journey. And I think it's just making that starting point and saying, how are we going to do this together? I think it's asking that first question. That's what needs to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Robin. And I certainly kind of relate to that thing about it being a collective kind of inquiry, really, isn't it? You know, it's about kind of understanding it together, really. Absolutely. And yeah, fabulous. And that's what Kind of Leads is about, really. It's a start of a movement that's growing around, you know, joining all the dots together. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Angela. I think Bryony, I saw your hand up several times as well.
Oh, Bryony.
Hello. Thank you. I mean, to be honest, I could talk all week about this conversation. I think it's fascinating and just so deeply important. I coach people, and it's mostly teachers and academics, artists, community engagement work, and run mental health first aid training. And like all coming from place for me for kindness, for our relationship to ourselves, a relationship to each other. But the thing you were saying about the child noticing between the teachers, that for me is this other part that I'm thinking, how do I get to this? It's the value of us witnessing relationships, kind relationships outside of ourselves.
Exactly.
And I've just been looking at secondary schools with my youngest, and we saw 3 schools we're really interested in. And I said, what is the fundamental difference between them? And she said, well, this one didn't show its kindness. The other 2 really showed its kindnesses, and that's all she said. Wow. And the wisdom of that, I thought, yeah, because I have a safeguarding background, an education background. And for me, and now coaching people in those settings, and in business as well, people leave places that they're not finding kindness. So for me, there's something around, I don't know how, I don't know, but pushing this out further, the stakeholders, the people who are coming to work at the place, the people who are coming to school there, building this, you know, the importance to stakeholders that it's, you know, she's around Ofsted, but yeah. you know, looking for kindness in a school, looking for kindness in the business, and actually, when I work with people who are struggling with it or struggling with the impact they're having on other people, it's about having forgotten this.
Exactly.
Connected, like Gloria said, doing it for ourselves first, and then.
I think that's exactly right. And, you know, at the end of the day, it comes back to that question, like, what kind of a place do we want to be in? What kind of environment do we want to be in? And I think when we're honest about that, place that we want to be in is a place which is kind. I think that's a very human thing. So we just need to bring that out and say, it's okay to say that, you know, there isn't some other kind of external judge who said that's a very bad thing to say, or that's idealistic and that's very naive. Actually, it's what makes sense. It's kind of obvious when you sit down and think about it. So yeah, I totally agree, Bryony.
There's a question from Nicola in the chat box. Nicola, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and ask. Let's see, I have to ask you to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Hello.
Yeah, I mean, I could probably think of 100 questions and even more after the event's over, I'm sure. So I just tried to think of the one that sort of came to the top of the surface, and I suppose it's, you know, what you were saying around there being a lot of work needing and a lot of preparation, and we're going to be coming up with a lot of barriers as well that are going to prevent things from going the way that theoretically they might look like they could be a success. So I was just wondering, just as individuals, and before we even start to think about bringing it as wide as possible to as many people as possible, what is the biggest barrier for us individually, and how could we start to break that down to give us more success for engaging in any bigger projects that come in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nicola, because I think that speaks to the point that we were discussing earlier about what's the starting point. You know, so if you've got a school where they've already engaged in kindness and they've already got this lovely nurturing, supportive ethos, then it sort of fits. It's easy because they're already on that trajectory. How do you start elsewhere? What are the barriers that you need to overcome? I guess my first starter for 10 is probably going to revolve around awareness raising. To say, actually, first of all, let's start by being aware of where kindness is in our lives, whichever community it might be, whether it's the workplace or a school or whatever. Let's start by noticing the kindness. That's a very important point, first of all, and then noticing the impact, recognizing the impact. So being aware of where kindness is and what impact it's having. I think that's really important, because that's going to be the first thing to let you know that actually this stuff matters. It's not just some extra thing. This stuff really matters. And I think that that's got to be the first barrier to remove, or the first barrier to overcome, people thinking it doesn't really matter, doesn't really make a difference. It's a nice thing to have if you can, but it doesn't really matter. That's the barrier that we need to overcome first. So I would say challenge that mentality and say, actually, you know what? It does matter. It's not just a little nice extra. It's not just a bonus. It's not just a luxury. This is pretty fundamental. And we know that it's fundamental as soon as we start asking the question, where is kindness and what impact does it have on people? Because when you ask that question, the answer comes back to you really, really strongly. It matters a huge amount to us. And it doesn't matter where you do that. It matters. And I have had this is a wonderful thing about doing projects like this. I've had the most amazing conversations with people in all walks of life. And what they say consistently, absolutely every time, is kindness matters, makes a difference. So I think that's the first barrier. The idea that kindness doesn't matter, we've got to challenge that by raising awareness, noticing kindness, noticing its impacts.
Thank you. Thank you, Robin.
Thanks,
Thank you. Robin, we'll take one last question and then I'll let you go, because I know you're busy. So David was interested in asking a question. So I'm gonna find him. Where is he, David?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm in the kitchen. I'm on cooking duty at the meditation. Actually, I've been scribbling for an hour, and I've been absolutely gobsmacked, as we say up here. It's just, I don't want to ask a question because I'm close to the thing. I'll probably afterwards, but I really just wanted to say thank you, Robin, and to Gloria. it's the most absolutely beautiful conversation, which kind of reinforces my, like you were saying, Gloria, the kindness is an intuitive thing, and I suppose the only thing I'll say is it is a strange world, isn't it, when we've got a kind of research kindness when we are humankind. I mean, but I love this comment that you need both. You know, Gloria was saying she is intuitively kind, and I worked in a dental setting with kids for nearly 30 years, and I saw that I had to be kind, but the kids had intuitive kindness, even though I was sort of doing things they probably didn't want to get done at that time. So I love that idea, but I also love this idea that you've got to research it and sort of spell it out. So I just wanted to say thank you, really. It was absolutely beautiful. In fact, I haven't really done the cooking because I've had to sit down and write all the things that I was hearing. So thank you so much, and thank you, Gloria, for the for carrying it forward. It was a wonderful, most worthwhile hour. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, David. That's such a lovely comment to hear. And you know what? Don't feel bad at all about asking that question about, actually, it's kind of like weird and interesting that we have to research kindness, because of course, as a psychologist, right, I'm very, very familiar with that thing where people are saying, gosh, but it's just about human beings. I mean, it's kind of common sense, and why do we need research to tell us what's obvious to us? And I suppose the interesting thing about that, David, is that the nuances and the complexities about exactly how it works aren't always obvious, and they aren't always noticed. And I think it goes back to like Nicola's question before about how do we actually raise awareness of what's actually happening and be quite systematic in being able to lay that out. I think you're right, David. It is so intuitive, and it's so kind of, in some ways, so obvious, and it makes sense as soon as you stop to think about it. But the issue is we don't often, in the what's the word I'm looking for? In the busyness of everyday life, we just often don't stop to sit down and think about it. And that's what's been lovely about this conversation, and to hear from you.
Yeah, and also I suppose the role of stress, because that's I worked in that situation. Like you were saying, Gloria, when the pressure's on, you sometimes forget to be kind, and it doesn't feel nice, does it?
No, exactly. Well, I'm just seeing in the the other comments from JL and Carolyn about that's interesting, about making sure people have space to rest. Absolutely. And then exactly as you say, JL's, it's like so much of this is just happening, and it doesn't even get, you don't even pay attention to it because you just don't assume that it's there. And so I suppose this is shining a light on it, isn't it? Shining a light on what we need. And maybe the rest is really important, and it's the connection with others while we're resting. And shining a light on what difference it makes is what all of this is about. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to sharing more of the results with you in due course, hopefully early next year. And I'm looking forward in turn to hearing more about what comes out of this wonderful week that you've got ahead of you. Sounds absolutely brilliant. Well done to the whole team for putting it together. Thank
you. Well, Hayley's just made a comment. She's another one of our volunteers. It's like, how can we help you? Is there anything we can do? I mean, we tried, to raise awareness for the study itself. But maybe one way we can do is maybe we can have a one-off event, after the results come out, and we can do this again, and open it up, and again get more people just to hear what's come out of it. I think that would be one way. And build a kind of a network that connects people in this space. I think will be so good, because together, again, you see, I'm always coming up with these cheesy lines, but together we are stronger. Oh, there's no question, Robin, it is, and that's why we need everybody who's even vaguely interested in this space to connect with each other. That's what I'm saying to everybody. If you're even vaguely interested, connect in some way to something that we're doing this week, because we've got loads of stuff going on online, in person, anyone can access, whether they're in Leeds or whether they're somewhere else. So yeah. Brilliant. Right. Well, thank you so much, Robin. Really, really appreciate your time. Good luck with all the work that you've got ahead of you. 60,000 questionnaires. That's not for the faint-hearted. Indeed. Thank you. And thanks to everybody who came today and for participating. We really appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. Lovely to see you all. Thank you. See you
Bye.
soon. Bye.
Bye.